And one night I just woke up at like 3 or 4 in the morning and I just had this like bolt of inspiration that I could write a book set in Japan.
Andrew, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited to meet you and chat about the book.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So let's just get right into it. Give me the pitch for your book.
All right. The CIA betrayed him. Now he's their only hope to stop a war. Thomas Caine was the CIA's deadliest killer until the agency betrayed him and left him for dead in the deserts of Afghanistan. Now he survives off the grid in Thailand's criminal underworld. But when a feud with a local gangster lands him in jail, his old CIA masters return with an offer he can't refuse: rot in a hellish Thai prison or accept one last mission in Tokyo, Japan. Forced to hunt the neon-lit city for a CIA asset's runaway daughter, Caine soon crosses paths with a sinister faction of the Yakuza crime syndicate and finds himself drawn into a terror plot that could ignite a devastating war between the US and China. But Caine knows a double-cross when he sees one. He's convinced someone in the CIA is manipulating him from behind the scenes. Trust is a luxury Caine can't afford, and as he seeks redemption for his blood-stained past, he must decide who has earned his loyalty and who deserves his vengeance. Tokyo Black is a high-octane, fast-paced spy thriller packed with gun battles, car chases, fascinating characters, and international intrigue. If you crave the thrills of a Mission Impossible or James Bond movie in book form, take a trip to Tokyo with betrayed assassin Thomas Caine in Tokyo Black.
That's awesome. I love it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, man.
Very exciting. And it kicked off really strong.
I had to turn the marketing brain up to 11 there.
Yeah, that was really good. And a really solid start. I didn't get to finish the story. Thank you so much for sending me a copy of it. I didn't get
my pleasure.
to quite finish it, but I think I'm far enough into it to ask questions without giving spoilers as we go along. So that's probably the perfect amount. So let's get into what sparked the story. Where'd you get the idea from?
You know, it's one of those stories like, it's like a classic author story where you'll hear it and you'll be like, there's no way that's true. That's just something. But I swear it's true. You know, I had always wanted to write a book. Years and years and years, like many writers, I had tons of half-finished works on my hard drive and stuff. And I was working at a job that I really didn't particularly like, just wasn't a good fit for me. And it wasn't like a great point in my life. Like I had gone through a divorce and I didn't like this job and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I had been to Japan in the past and really enjoyed it. I really wanted to go back, take another trip there. But for all kinds of reasons, I just couldn't do it at that time. Like work and money and schedule, it just wasn't going to work out. And one night I just woke up at like 3 or 4 in the morning and I just had this like bolt of inspiration that I could write a book set in Japan and that would be sort of a virtual vacation for me. And I'm like, okay, I can't go, but I can project myself there mentally. And that's kind of my escape from this job I don't like and all this other stuff. And it instantly like just started brainstorming and all these things kind of came to me in a flash. Like, well, what kind of book would it be? I'm like, well, a spy thriller just seemed like a natural. And I love spy thrillers and for a location like Tokyo, it seemed like that would work well. And all these details, like the character's name and the title of the book and the basic plot, like I kind of scribbled down these notes and 90% of the book, I think, came to me like that one night, this flash of inspiration. Of course, those were broad strokes, but that's where it all started. So I started writing it in the mornings before work. I would get up an hour early and write as many words as I could before I left. And I got pretty far, but I'd say I got maybe like halfway through and then lost a little bit of steam. And then a couple years later, I was working at a job that I really did like and things were good. And I had a new girlfriend and she was in my apartment and she picked up the manuscript. It was like on my desk and started reading it one day. And she got really into it and started asking me all these questions like, well, what's this character really thinking? What's going to happen to this guy? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I have to finish it. And I think that sort of enthusiasm that she had and the fact that she was engaged enough to like ask about it kind of lit the fire again. And I worked at that time, I worked freelance. So I would have gigs that lasted a certain amount of time and they would end. And I was in a very unique spot where the gig I was on, I knew was ending. And I knew I had another gig 2 or 3 months down the road already booked and lined up. So I had this gap and I didn't have to worry about because the 2 jobs were booked. And I was like, all right, I'm going to use that time. I'm going to finish the book and I'm just going to pretend that this is my job and get up at like 9 a.m. write, take lunch, write. And through that chunk of time, I finished the first draft of the book. And then, of course, it was my first novel. So I had a few more revisions and drafts and things. But that was kind of how it all started.
Awesome. So from start to finish, we're looking at like 3 years or so?
Probably for the first one, yes. And most of that isn't writing. Most of that is just me procrastinating. But, I think it's really until you finish a book, like it's kind of hard to know. It's like seemed like this insurmountable mountain.
Yeah.
You can't really see the end of it. And it's very easy to kind of lose your way or get disheartened. Now that I've done it, if I'm having a rough day or if I can't figure something out, I'm like, all right, just keep working at it. You'll get it. You can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. But back then, I'd never done it. I didn't know if I could do it. It was like a huge thing like looming over me, but those little like bursts of encouragement would go a long way in keeping me going.
That's awesome. Hey, 3 years is actually pretty good. I think so. It took me like 30 years.
Yeah, like I say 3 years, but like I said, I've been trying to write books my whole life. So you could say it was 40 years. It just depends
Okay.
when I look at it. I think almost everyone I've spoken to, like their first book is like, it's a very kind of chopped thing broken up over these chunks of time. And then you do your next one. Now you can do it. And so you can kind of go through it start to finish a little bit easier.
So is Tokyo Black the first book you finished from start to finish?
Absolutely. Yeah. First novel. I'd written screenplays, which I also think helped. Like I was a film major in college. And so once I left college, I'd written some screenplays, and finishing those also, I think, pushed me further than I had been previously. I think just completing things is really important as a writer. The more things you finish, the more you kind of learn and the more you improve, better equipped you are to tackle the next project.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I think it took me like 10 years to write my first one, which will never see the light of day. But more recently, it takes me about like 4 months. So
yeah, exactly.
So
that's
like
roughly what it takes.
As you start doing it, yeah.
And I think, I used to be really bummed about all those half-finished projects, but now when I think about it, I'm like, well, I guess those were the practice I needed to get to the point where I could finish one. So
yeah, exactly. And this book is traditionally published, right?
It is now. I originally self-published it way back in the day. So around the time that I finished it, while I was writing, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I hadn't really decided like if I was going to, I don't even know if I knew about self-publishing when I started it. I certainly did before I finished it, but I hadn't really decided what route I was going to take. And I worked in the entertainment industry. And so at that point, I had optioned a couple screenplays, which never got made, but I'd optioned them. And I had optioned some pitches for TV shows and things, none of which ever bore any fruit, but I'd kind of been through that process. And it's a very long, frustrating process in its own way. And there's lots of gatekeepers and lots of dead ends and false starts. So by the time I finished the book, I kind of had decided that I didn't want to go through that process again, or at least not for this. I was like, I'm just going to have this be a thing of my own. Around that time, Barry Eisler had started self-publishing with Amazon for his Rain books. And I really liked him. He was one of my favorite authors. So I was like, I'm going to do that. And if nobody buys it, that's fine. I wasn't really looking at it as a money-making venture. I was like, I'm going to put it out there and it'll just be for me and that'll be it. And so I did it, and it did reasonably well, not phenomenal. I couldn't quit my job or anything, but it sold and people liked it. So I kept on writing, and the second and third books were all pretty successful. And so I would always kind of drop in and out. Like I would work freelance for a little while, and then I would stop and focus on writing for a little while, and I'd go back and forth. And then recently, like at the round end of last year, a publisher approached me, Boldwood Books. They're a UK-based publisher, but they also publish in the US and all over the world. And they were starting a new division focused on thrillers, and they had seen the books and were interested in them. And so we had a bunch of phone calls, talked back and forth, and we struck a deal. So they bought my backlist, and now they're currently republishing it. And I just literally 2 days ago, on my birthday, no less, I turned in the manuscript for the next like brand new book in the series. So they're republishing the series all leading up to this new novel that's coming out in November.
So how many are they republishing? I think there's like 3 out there, right? Is it?
Oh, there's 3 now, but there's going to be 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So the new one I turned in will be book 6. I'm contracted with them for several books after that. And the original series actually consisted of 4 novels and 2 novellas. And the novellas were written at different points in time, but they actually were 2 parts of the same story. So we just combined those to form 1 book now since we're publishing everything, and it kind of made more sense to do it that way. So that's the 5th book. So it'll be, they're republishing 1 through 5, and then book 6 will be the brand new one in November. And then there's a couple more contracted after that I haven't even thought through yet. So we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, hey, if you're lucky, you'll just wake up and have that,
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully
hopefully it just hits you. Yeah. Yeah. And it was an international bestseller, right? This Tokyo
It
Black?
was. So, Amazon, you can earn those bestseller tags, like basically, and their algorithm is constantly changing. But the way it used to work, and I think the way it still works, is you have to hit #1 in one of your categories and hold it for a certain amount of time. Amazon's very secretive about their system. I don't know if anyone knows exactly how long it has to hold it, but Tokyo Black earned that tag in multiple countries and held it for a couple days. So it was an international bestseller. So
Awesome. Congratulations.
thank you.
That's not easy to do.
It was really exciting. I was blown away when that happens.
Yeah. So was there a moment in your life that shaped the book, like a feeling or a memory?
Well, like I said, creatively, a big part of Tokyo Black specifically was how much I loved visiting Japan. Like, Japan made a huge impact on me when I went there. And so much so that if you like, as you read the book and you've started, so like the character in the book has been to Japan in the past and is coming back. I did it that way on purpose because that was kind of my headspace. And I was like, okay, I think this would be the easiest way for me to get inside this character because that's how I feel. I was there and I want to go back. And in my research, even just researching the book, I saw how certain things had changed and certain places I'd been were different, or the businesses had changed, or things had been torn down. And so I wanted to kind of convey that sense of time, like he'd been there in the past. And then I also wanted to make it kind of an important place for him, where something happened to him that changed the course of his life. And now he's going back there and his life is changing again. So all of those things were kind of feelings that I had, but then taken and fictionalized and put into a much more exciting context than my life. But that was really where it stemmed from. And since writing that book, I've been to Japan, many times. And in fact, the new book that I turned in is also set in Japan, and it's him going back to help some of the characters that he meets in this book. And again, is kind of like a reflection point of all the things that have happened to him since Tokyo Black, because as you go through the series, his life definitely changes and goes through some ups and downs. So
yeah, it's probably the best research project of if we have
yes,
right? When you travel.
Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky. I do tend to, when I travel, I kind of view where I am like through the lens of, oh, what would a book here be like? What would I do at this location? And of course, there's a few books that are set in places that no one would want to visit, like South Sudan in the middle of a civil war is not a place that I plan to go, or Siberia is in one of the books. But I enjoy the research. And I'd say the 2 things that I always try to do with all the books in the series that are most important to me is to make them cinematic, like I often call them action movies for the mind, because there's all different levels of realism and drama in spy fiction. And I definitely lean more towards the melodramatic, high octane thriller versus like a realistic John le Carré kind of thriller. And the other thing is I really want the locations to come alive, because I wrote that first book as a virtual vacation for me. That's the experience I want to give the reader. Like, I want them to feel like they've gone on a trip to this place. And it's not necessarily about hitting them with a bunch of details. It's more about, for me, it's more about capturing the mood, kind of in the vibe, and just giving them that experience. And so those 2 things I really focus on for each book.
Awesome. Yeah, I really felt that when I was reading the book. I was like,
oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, to talk about research, how did you do that? Like, when I was reading your book and I'm looking at these places and different groups that were involved and all these names and things, I'm like, wow, it's just amazing what's all in here. I'm like, what's happening? Sometimes because my brain is always going a million miles an hour. So I have a hard time sometimes keeping track. And it's just like, wow, there's just so much.
Some of it, I mean, like I said, a lot of it were things I remembered from my time there. And of course I had pictures. I immediately went back and dug up all my pictures, and I jotted down the impressions that I remembered of those places. And then Google. I mean, Google, just researching online, you can do so much. And also I watched a lot of movies. Like I watched a lot of Yakuza movies, Japanese, because I kind of wanted to bring a little bit of that vibe to it. I even played quite a few video games set in Japan. There's a video game series called Yakuza, which is all set like in Kabukicho, but they fictionalize it and call it something else. But so I played those games quite a bit, and just anything I could find to pull in. In fact, I'm not sure how far you've gotten, but there's a piece of software, like a virtual character that another person uses to mask their identity. And that came from one of the very first things I did was I just Googled weird things about Japan. That was what I typed in because I was looking for just odd details. And the first thing I found was this thing called Hatsune Miku, who is a virtual performer. Like, so essentially this company made this software so that if you're a songwriter and you don't have a singer perform your songs, you can write the song and this animated character with a digitized voice performs the song you write. And this character became so popular that now it's like this huge multimedia empire based around this virtual singer, and she does concerts. And so I like saw this video of this hologram, like she looks like an anime character, but then there's actual real musicians around her on a stage, like performing the concert. And there's people in the audience like waving these sticks. And I was like,
That's
that is
wild.
amazing. So like I worked that in, tweaked it and changed it. I was like, I got to work that in. Just finding these things that interested me and putting them into the book.
What about like the prison and how the CIA functioned and all that?
Oh, well, funny. The reason why I made the character like a betrayed assassin and he's like kind of on the outside is because I don't have a ton of experience with the CIA. You know, a lot of writers in this genre either were in the military or worked in intelligence, and I don't have that background. So like, all right, I'm going to make this character on the outside. So I don't have to dive too far into the world. Like I can just kind of skim the surface of the world. And then from there, I did do research. I reached out to people online and who did have backgrounds like that and kind of asked them general questions. There's an author named Matt Fulton who is like a research guru who just does everything about the CIA. So like I'll always hit him up like, hey, do you know like what this guy's office would look like? Like he'll be like, oh, and he'll have like pictures and like videos and like he's just totally immersed in that world. He runs a podcast too about spies, actual like spies and intelligence operations. So stuff like that. So I tried to make sure that I wasn't really focusing on the stuff I didn't know. Like I tried to focus on the world that I knew and the world I was most interested in, which for me was the international location and the action and the pacing and that kind of thing. And then the stuff with the CIA, I just tried to be like, okay, what's the minimum I need to include in the story to make it work? And I'll just try to keep that a smaller part of the book.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's awesome. How did you find those people?
Some of them I had just read their books. I love reading, and especially once I did to self-publish originally, I was looking at a lot of authors who were doing the same thing just to kind of see, okay, well, how did they do it? Like, what do their covers look like? What do their blurbs look like? How do they format their books? The self-publishing world is kind of a big community that you can definitely dive in and meet people and ask help. There's tons of Facebook groups about it. So that was one way. And then the rest, a lot of times, like if you're talking to one person, they'll be like, oh, you should hit up this guy, this particular fact. Like he knows a lot about that stuff. And so like you kind of start building this web of contacts.
Okay. Cool. So going back to character, how do you balance a character? Because you're writing spy thrillers, which, like you said, is high octane, it's moving fast. How do you balance building like character and having people like care about the character versus being all plot driven? Because I've noticed in a lot of high action like books or movies, sometimes you don't, like a James Bond, you don't really care about the character so much.
Right.
It's the high octane.
Yeah.
You're
It's
in
the
there,
surroundings, right? Well, it's interesting bringing up James Bond. I'm a huge James Bond fan. I don't know if you can see there's an Italian Goldfinger
yeah.
over my shoulder. And so, I'm not just a fan of the movies, although I love the movies, but I'm also a fan of the books and Ian Fleming's writing. And so I would say Ian Fleming is probably one of the 2 or 3 writers that influenced my style the most because I read him very early. My dad was also a big Bond fan, and he had all the original books like on our bookshelf when I was growing up. And as soon as I started liking the movies, I was like, oh, there's books. And I started reading all the books. I've read them all many times. So I absorbed his style, like very young, elements of his style. And so when I was planning this, there's kind of a theory that Fleming, when he created James Bond, created like the prototypical post-World War II British hero. At that time, England's position in the world was sort of uncertain. The US was on the rise and Europe was on the decline in terms of political impact. So he created this very like prototypical British hero that could kind of allow the country to live out its fantasies at that time. Like back in the 50s when he wrote those books, like a lot of people didn't travel the world. People didn't get to go into a casino. Like most people didn't have those experiences. And so he was kind of projecting the fantasy of his countrymen at that time and wrote books like to satisfy those readers. So when I started Tokyo Black, when I was in my outlining and planning phase, I very consciously tried to put myself through the same process. So I'm like, okay, like for the United States right now in this point of time, like what do I think is sort of the prototypical type of hero? And to me, I think the US is more, I always think of us as kind of rebellious. We formed by breaking away from another power. And so like maybe this character is kind of fighting against the CIA, even though he works with them. And he's a trade guy. And it's more about, he feels a lot of guilt and uncertainty about what he's doing because we're a post-Watergate, post-Iraq nation. Like, we're not always sure that we believe in what our government is doing, what the right thing is. So I just tried to go through a thought process like that in creating this character. And then in writing the books, I think it's really important to just make sure that no matter how outlandish and how crazy the action gets, that the hero isn't perfect, that he has flaws. And so for Caine, he has a lot of doubts, a lot of introspection. He sometimes thinks about things and is like, is this the right thing? I don't know if I should be doing this. Is this the right way to go? Or I shouldn't be doing this. This is crazy. Why am I helping this person? I should cut loose and run. I try to include those thoughts in his thought process, which I do think comes from Fleming. If you read the original Bond books, the character's a lot more introspective than the character in the movies. Like the character in the movie portrayed, most of the time, maybe recently this changed, but most of the time portrayed as just uber confident, uber competent, can do anything. But in the books, he's a little bit more, he has doubts and he's a little bit more of a human character. So I tried to just include little elements of that. And kind of what I always compare it to is, so when I was growing up in the 80s, the two big action stars were Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme. But my favorite was Van Damme because if you watch the Seagal movie, like he would never take a hit. Like he just goes through, wipes the floor, doesn't even break a sweat. Whereas Van Damme would kind of get the crap beat out of him and then come back at the end and for a finale. So I think audiences root more for the character that has to struggle a little bit, or maybe everything doesn't always work out, or takes some hits, gets hurt a little bit. Like to me, that helps bring the audience in a little.
Yeah, for sure. So did that come as you were writing, or did that come before? Did you plan it out?
I mean, in terms of the thought process I was telling you about the character and what he would be, that came before the writing. But I just always try to keep that in the back of my mind as I'm writing. And a lot of it has just become internalized now. Like that's his character. Caine is a very introspective character. His thoughts are part of the book. Sometimes I portray him almost like he has these like two sides. There's this killer's voice that's always whispering in the back of his head that he can't really decide if he should listen to or not. He's not sure, is that the better side of me or is that the bad side? And so those elements have just become woven into his character. So I don't necessarily plot them out, but they're just kind of there in my head when I'm writing him. Okay. But the process of what kind of character will this be, like that was something I did before I wrote.
How much do you do of the outline versus just jumping in?
It's changed as I've gone. So for Tokyo Black, I had a very, very detailed outline. Not as detailed as some. Like for instance, I think like James Patterson's outlines are like 20 pages long. It definitely wasn't like that. But I did have a scene by scene outline. It was maybe 4 or 5 pages and it was extremely complete. I deviated from it quite a bit. At one point, I think I always say almost every character other than Caine in the outline died at some point, and I kept changing it, reversing it, and now most of them don't die. But then as I went through the books, I would say I started to see, okay, I'm writing these long outlines, but I'm kind of getting to this point, and then they all diverge quite wildly. So I started loosening up the outlining process a little bit. And I would say now I typically have maybe like the first act outlined to that degree. And then the rest, I just write sort of general descriptions of what happened. A few paragraphs for act 2, a few paragraphs for act 3. And I try to keep it a little bit looser because I think for me now, I can get kind of lost in the outline, and I kind of feel like that's really putting off the work of the book at this point. So there's certain things that I know I need to know. Like I need to know, like, why is the villain doing what they're doing? What is the villain's plot? And if I have those key details filled in, I can feel out the rest of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What about yourself? Are you more of an outliner or more of a pantser? Or?
I have also switched. I was pantsing. Well, I went back and forth. I went from an outliner, didn't get very far.
Right.
Went to pantsing, and then have come back to outlining. But the same thing I have found when I write the characters, or when I'm writing the outline, the characters take over. And then when I actually write the book, like you said, it goes right off the rails.
Yeah.
So it's like I didn't know the character enough to have an outline. And then once I actually know the character well enough, it changes.
But the other thing I've found is a lot of the times so for instance, like I'm on my 6th book writing Caine, so I know him quite well, but sometimes a background character will just become something very different, than what you imagine they would be. That takes the story in a whole different direction. I remember on the 2nd book, the villain, I outlined the villain a certain way. And from the very first scene, he just was something totally different. Just came out completely different. I was like, oh, wow, where'd this come from? And it utterly changed the book, and for the better, I think. But like a lot of times, you just can't really foresee the things that are going to change the plot and change like how things go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My characters always mess with my stories once I get to know them.
But it's a good thing. I think that's where the best stuff comes from.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I don't mind it. I don't mind ditching part of the outline, but I just put less time into it now.
Yeah.
With still outlining, because pantsing is where it's easy to write like act 1 and then lose
Get
track
harder.
of
Yeah,
where you're supposed to go. Cause I'm like, oh, you kind of write yourself into a hole. I know some people are great at that. They don't mind, but yeah, it didn't work for me. I need a little bit more guidance than the straight pantsing. So.
Right on.
All right, well, we're going to do some wrap up. I can ask questions forever here, but we're going to wrap it up a little bit. And if you could give a piece of advice for someone who just published like book 1 or 2, what would it be?
Wow. Okay. I think it's really, I think the most important, well, it sort of depends like what your focus is, but like, let's say I'll tackle this from the perspective of if you're looking to make this either a full-time gig or like a significant side hustle where, you want this to be like a business. I think the most important thing is to have a plan, because I talk to a lot of authors who are basically all they're thinking about is the first book, and getting it out there. And they're thinking that book is going to be enormously successful. And the reality is that doesn't often happen. Even the success that I had with my first book, I don't think would be enough to build a career off of. So you have to plan, you have to like look at that as one brick. Also know you've got to be planning other bricks. So like figure out how can you turn this into a series, or do you want a series? If you want to do standalones, like how can you make all the standalone kind of fit together so that you could market them? Like kind of always have that marketing hat ready to put on so that you can build and build and build. Because I think what happens to a lot of writers that I talk to is they put out their first book. It doesn't do like enormously well, like so well that they can quit their job or something. And then they get discouraged. And I kind of call that lottery thinking. Like they're like, oh, this book's my lottery ticket. That's going to win. And then I'm done. And even for very successful authors, it just doesn't usually work that way. It's really more about building a body of work. So do you have a writing process? Like, do you have time set aside, whether you're working like another job, can you devote 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour a day to writing? What will the books in this series be? Like, how can you keep this story going? What other things can you do? What kind of marketing can you do? What do the covers in your genre look like? Or, if you're self-publishing, or if you're plan on going traditional route, like what publishers would be a good fit for this material? I think a lot of authors just don't think through all those details and they just
Mhm.
put out the first book and then get discouraged. So I would say, yeah, it's great if your first book does well, but be planning. Plan your next book and your book after that and your book after that, and look at it more like a business, and don't let temporary setbacks discourage you from moving forward.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
What kind of time do you put into like marketing versus writing?
When I was self-publishing, quite a bit. Well, to me, it seemed like quite a bit. I'm sure there's people who, but I would schedule time. Basically, I do like maybe an hour, 2 hours a week, like an hour on Monday and an hour on Friday. But I would like do Facebook ads and Amazon ads, look at the ads, see how they're doing, just do all that business stuff, like, do I need to increase my bids? Should I launch more ads? Do I need to look at other platforms? Things like that. Also, I think of building my newsletter. Do I have a plan? What am I going to send this week in my newsletter? What am I doing to grow my newsletter? Like, am I signed up for group promos on BookFunnel or things like that? I think having a newsletter, actually, back to the question we were talking about before, I apologize, but having a newsletter is also a super important thing that a lot of authors, I think, kind of skip over or don't realize how big a deal it is. Because the reason I was able to launch my books as well as I did is because I kind of planned in advance and had built up a newsletter of readers before the books came out. So I had an audience already that I could blast, like, hey, the book 1 is out now. Hey, book 2 is out. So I would say probably 2 to 3 hours a week I was spending. Now that I'm with the publisher, they're handling that, so I don't do it as much. But I do find that has freed me up to still use that time to pursue other kinds of marketing. So, for instance, talking to you or being on a podcast, that's a kind of marketing. I would say now I'm kind of just focused more on marketing brand versus like an individual book, like me as an author versus selling book 1 of this series.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. And where can readers find you?
Oh, I'm at andrewwarrenbooks.com, or of course I'm on Amazon. A lot of readers don't know this, but on Amazon, if there's an author that you like, if you go to their author page, you can follow them. There's a little button that says follow, and then Amazon will send you emails when they have new books coming out or when they have books on sale or if they have a pre-order, like that way they'll kind of send it right to you. So yeah, follow me on Amazon. I'd really appreciate it. And visit me at andrewwarrenbooks.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. If you don't mind sticking around for a couple of bonus questions at the end for the newsletter subscribers, we'll just have a few extra for you.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.